Hello, and welcome back to Ebon Whisper. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoyed chilling tales that speak in the Ebon Whisper, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, I live in a small cottage hidden deep in the woods, about an hour away from the nearest gas station. There are no nearby shops, no streetlights, and no neighbors close enough to hear me if I shout. The nearest road is a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that cuts between miles of trees before finally reaching a small town. I moved there because I needed silence. A year earlier, I had suffered a serious breakdown at work. I had been employed at a software company in the city, spending 10 or 12 hours a day staring at a screen while managers demanded impossible deadlines. I stopped sleeping properly. I stopped eating. I became convinced that my coworkers were speaking about me whenever I left the room. Eventually, I broke down in the middle of the office. I do not remember everything that happened. I remember shouting. I remember someone trying to hold my shoulders. I remember knocking a computer monitor from a desk because I thought there was a camera hidden inside it. After that, I spent some time in a hospital. The doctors prescribed antipsychotic medication and told me that stress had pushed my mind beyond its limit. They explained that the medicine would help control the paranoia, anxiety, and confusion. They also warned me not to stop taking it suddenly. When I left the hospital, I knew I could not return to my old life. The city felt like a cage. The skyscrapers rose around me like giant monuments built to greed. The streets were constantly crowded, yet I had never felt more alone. Car horns, construction equipment, sirens, and thousands of voices filled every moment of the day. Even inside my apartment, I could hear traffic passing beneath the window. I needed space. I needed air. I needed somewhere my thoughts could become quiet again. My parents did not understand. They believed I was running away from my problems instead of facing them. We argued badly, and eventually they cut me off financially. They said they would not continue supporting me while I refused to follow the plans my doctors and family had created. That left me with very little money. Then I found the cottage. It was old, isolated, and unusually cheap. The listing included only a few photographs. The house had one bedroom, a small bathroom, a combined kitchen and living room, and a wooden shed outside. The roof looked repaired, the well still worked, and there was enough internet service for me to continue doing coding work from home. It was practically my only option. I bought the place and moved in. For the first few months, the isolation felt perfect. I woke whenever I wanted, made coffee, opened my laptop, and worked for several hours. I earned enough money through coding contracts to pay for food, internet, medication, and repairs. When I was not working, I cleaned the cottage, read books, or walked through the woods. There were hiking trails nearby, though I rarely went far. I enjoyed standing outside and listening to the trees move in the wind. The quiet felt clean. Once every week or two, I drove to the gas station to buy fuel and basic food. The store sold bread, canned soup, frozen meals, bottled water, and anything else a person might need in an emergency. My only regular human interaction was with the teenager behind the counter. He was probably 17, with greasy hair and spots across his face. Our conversations rarely went beyond simple words. Yes, please, no, thank you, have a good day. Then I would return to the cottage. At first, I believed being alone was helping me. Eventually, the loneliness began to change. It did not arrive suddenly. It slowly entered my life, like cold air passing through a crack beneath a door. Days went by without hearing another person's voice. Sometimes I spoke aloud simply to prove that I still could. I commented on my work, complained about the weather, and read parts of books to the empty room. The silence stopped feeling peaceful. It became heavy. Isolation began eating at me like a pack of starving wolves. Each day, their teeth pulled away another piece of my mental health. The infestation began slowly. So slowly that I cannot remember the exact day it started. Small things began disappearing. A spoon vanished from the kitchen drawer. One of my socks went missing from beside the washing machine. A pencil disappeared from my desk. At first, I did not think anything of it. Everyone loses small items. I assumed I was becoming forgetful. I had been warned that my medication could affect my memory. Stress and lack of sleep could do the same. When another spoon vanished, I blamed myself again. Then 2 forks disappeared. A small silver ring my mother had given me was no longer inside the wooden box on my dresser. I searched everywhere. I checked beneath the furniture, inside drawers, behind the washing machine, and even in the rubbish bin. I found nothing. I began writing down where I placed things. I made lists on my phone. Spoons, 5. Forks, 6. Socks, 9 pairs. Medication, 1 full bottle. Each morning, I checked the list. Sometimes the numbers had changed. I tried to remain calm. The doctors had taught me to question my own fears. When something seemed impossible, I was supposed to search for a logical explanation before accepting the one created by panic. Perhaps mice were carrying away pieces of fabric. Perhaps I had dropped the cutlery while taking rubbish outside. Perhaps someone had entered the cottage while I was sleeping. That final thought frightened me so badly that I checked every lock and window. Nothing had been forced open. The cottage remained secure. One afternoon, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop balanced across my knees. The curtains were closed, even though the sun was still outside. I had developed a habit of keeping them shut while working. The darkness helped me focus on the bright computer screen. Lines of code filled the display. I had spent hours searching for an error inside a program, and the rest of the world had almost disappeared. The tapping of my keyboard was the only sound in the room. Then I heard something else. Small feet. They moved quickly across the hardwood floor. Pitter-patter. Pitter-patter. I stopped typing. The sound continued. Something ran behind the couch. My body became completely still. For several seconds, I could not even breathe. My mind began racing through possibilities. A mouse, a rat, a raccoon that had somehow entered the house. But it did not sound like one animal. It sounded like many. Hundreds of tiny feet moved around the couch, crossing behind me and heading towards the kitchen. The noises filled the dark room. Pitter-patter. Scratch. Pitter-patter. Then came the sound of metal striking metal. The cutlery drawer. Forks and spoons clattered together. I slowly closed the laptop. My heart sank so deeply that I felt sick. I wanted to stand, but my legs refused to move. It felt as though Medusa had looked directly at me and turned my body into stone. The noise grew louder. Something ran beneath the kitchen table. Another group crossed behind the couch. The cutlery continued moving. I gathered the little courage I had left and forced myself to stand. The nearest light switch was beside the front door. I moved towards it. The moment I took my first step, the sounds intensified. The room seemed to explode with movement. Hundreds of little feet scurried across the floor, rushing away from me. The creatures moved around the walls, beneath furniture, and through the kitchen. I ran for the switch. My hand struck the wall, missed it once, then found the plastic plate. I flipped the light on. Brightness flooded the room like water breaking through a dam. Every sound stopped. The silence was immediate. 1 second, the room had been alive with movement. The next, nothing. I stood beside the switch, breathing hard. The living room appeared normal. The couch was where it had always been. My books remained on the shelves. The front door was locked. Then I looked into the kitchen. The cutlery drawer was open. I walked towards it slowly. The forks, knives, and spoons were gone. Not all of them, but most. Only 2 butter knives and a single fork remained. I gripped the kitchen counter with both hands because it felt like the only thing keeping me attached to the floor. My heart beat like war drums. My hands shook. My thoughts collapsed into one another. I had dealt with pests before. Birds had entered the roof. Mice had found food inside the cupboards. Once, a raccoon had tried to tear open the rubbish bin outside. None of those animals stole spoons. My breathing became quick and shallow. I pulled open every curtain in the cottage. Afternoon sunlight filled the rooms, pushing away the shadows. I returned to the couch and sat down. For several minutes, I stared at the open drawer. I tried to explain what I had heard. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the cutlery had been missing before, and I had only noticed because I was already frightened. But the drawer had been closed. I remembered closing it after breakfast. Pressure built inside my head. I had never handled stress well. That was why I had ended up in the hospital. That was why I took medication. This was too much. I stood and stumbled into the hallway. My legs felt weak. My walk became stiff and unnatural. All I could hear was my own breath and the violent beating of my heart. I reached my bedroom door and grabbed the handle. My fingers wrapped around it as though I would fall if I let go. I pushed the door open and threw myself onto the bed. The moment my face touched the pillow, I began crying. Tears poured from my eyes. My body shook. I pulled the blanket around myself, creating a fortress from fabric and wool. It felt childish, but I wanted to believe it could protect me from everything outside. I remained there for hours. The sunlight slowly faded beyond the curtains. Darkness entered the house like fog. I do not know what time I finally moved. My fear had burned through so much energy that I felt empty. I was exhausted and numb, which was sometimes how my mind protected itself from pressure. Then I remembered my medication. I had not taken it that evening. I pushed away the blankets and left the bedroom. In my panic, I had not closed the door. The hallway was dark. I switched on every light as I passed. When I reached the kitchen, I took the pill bottle from the counter. The bottle felt unusually light. I removed the cap and turned it upside down above my palm. Nothing came out. Only air. The bottle was empty. I stared at it. I had collected a new supply only 3 days earlier. I remembered driving to the pharmacy. I remembered signing the receipt. I remembered placing the full bottle inside my jacket pocket. There should have been almost a month of medication inside it. I shook the container violently. Nothing. Panic exploded through me. I screamed. I shouted at the empty room and stamped my feet like an angry child. I opened drawers and searched the floor, hoping the pills had spilled. There was nothing. I knew I had collected the bottle on March 23rd. I checked my phone to confirm the date. The screen said April 24th. I stared at it for a long time. A full month had passed. I had not collected the medication 3 days earlier. I had collected it 32 days earlier. That meant I had not lost the pills. I had used them, or someone had. I sat on the floor. For 1 month, I had believed only a few days had passed. My memory contained meals, work, and visits to the gas station, but none of it fit together properly. Days seemed like hours. Hours felt like days. I could not separate 1 week from another. Had I been taking the medication every day? Had I missed doses? Had I swallowed more than one without remembering? My mind no longer felt trustworthy. My legs stopped working, and I collapsed fully onto the kitchen floor. I cried like someone who had just been told that a loved one had died. Tears ran down my face and dripped from my chin. "I'm not crazy," I whispered. The words sounded weak inside the empty cottage. Then I heard the small feet again. Pitter-patter. The sound came from the hallway. My crying stopped. I looked towards the darkness. Something moved beyond the kitchen light. For 1 moment, fear held me in place. Then curiosity took control. I raised my phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the hallway. A small figure stood in the center of it. It was shaped like a person, but no taller than 12 inches. Dirty white hair stood upright from the top of its round head. The head seemed too large for its thin neck. Its body was shaped like a pear, round in the center and narrow near the shoulders. Long, skinny arms hung at its sides. Its legs were also thin and ended in feet with only 2 long toes. Pale skin covered its body. Fine white hair grew across its arms, chest, and face. One hand had only 3 fingers. Those fingers were wrapped around one of my missing spoons. Where its eyes should have been were 2 narrow brown slits. The creature stood completely still in the flashlight beam. So did I. Then the brown slits opened. 2 large blue eyes pushed forward. The pupils were wide and dark, shaped like a frog's. The creature stared at me. Its spoon glinted in the light. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then it ran. It turned and raced down the hallway with impossible speed. I jumped to my feet and followed. I screamed as I ran. I do not remember deciding to chase it. My body seemed to move before my mind understood. The spoon reflected the flashlight beam, allowing me to track the little thief. It entered the bathroom. When I reached the doorway, I saw it scurry behind the toilet. A small hole opened in the wall near the floor. The creature squeezed into it and disappeared. I dropped to my knees. The bathroom tiles were cold against my skin. I pushed one arm into the hole. My fingers moved through a narrow tunnel filled with dirt and mud. The creature was gone. Anger replaced my fear. This was my home. These things had entered it. They had stolen from me. They had taken my medication. I clawed at the tunnel. My fingernails scraped through soil. Sharp stones and roots cut into my hands. I did not stop. I pulled away chunks of dirt and reached farther. The hole seemed too small to exist behind the bathroom wall. It continued downward beneath the cottage. I kept digging. Blood mixed with the mud. Sweat and tears ran down my face until I could no longer tell them apart. I felt like a trapped animal tearing at the bars of a cage. The memory of what happened next is unclear. It feels like a dream I only half remember. I know I continued clawing at the hole. I know I shouted into it. I may have heard movement beneath the floor. The last thing I clearly remember is my body collapsing onto the bathroom tiles. The cold floor pressed against my cheek. Then everything became dark. Sunlight woke me. Warm rays entered through the bathroom window and fell across my body. The light felt gentle, but the floor beneath me was freezing. I pushed myself upright. My entire body hurt. For several moments, I did not know why I was on the bathroom floor. Then I looked at my hands. They were covered in dried blood and dirt. Small cuts covered my fingers and palms. The memories returned. The creature, the spoon, the tunnel behind the toilet. I looked towards the wall. The hole was gone. Every tile remained in place. The wall behind the toilet was smooth and unbroken. There was no dirt on the floor, no broken plaster, no sign that I had spent hours digging. I touched the wall. Solid, I checked my hands again. The cuts were real. The dirt beneath my fingernails was real. I knew what I had seen. Those creatures were beneath the cottage. I needed proof. Not for the police, not for my parents, for myself. I left the bathroom and walked outside. The morning air was cold, but I barely noticed. I entered the small shed and took the axe from the wall. The handle felt heavy in my damaged hands. I returned to the cottage. I stood in the center of the living room and looked down at the wooden floorboards. I knew what I had to do. I raised the axe and swung. The metal head struck the wood with a violent crack. Normally, my thin body could only manage a few strong swings before becoming tired. That morning, adrenaline moved through my blood. I swung again. The wood split. Another swing sent splinters across the room. I continued. Crack, crunch, crack, my heavy breathing mixed with the sound of destruction. It became a terrible kind of music. I tore open the floor. Beneath the wooden boards was not the solid earth or foundation I expected. There were tunnels, dozens of them. Small passages had been dug beneath the cottage. They connected to round chambers no larger than bowls. I lowered the axe and stared. My missing belongings filled the chambers. Spoons, forks, knives, socks, coins, jewelry, pens, buttons, pieces of fabric. My mother's silver ring rested beside a pile of medication tablets. The creatures had taken everything. Something moved in one of the tunnels. Then 2 blue eyes opened. Another pair appeared beside them. Then another. 12 pairs of eyes stared up at me. The frog-like pupils widened in the darkness. Small white faces slowly emerged from the dirt. I dropped the axe. The next thing I remember clearly is running. I was outside the cottage and moving down the road. I did not stop to put on proper shoes. I did not take my phone, money, or jacket. I only ran. Branches scratched my arms near the roadside. Stones cut through my socks. I do not know how long I continued. The road seemed endless. My lungs burned, and my legs felt close to breaking. Eventually, a truck passed. The driver slowed after seeing me. He pulled over and climbed out. He was an older man wearing work clothes and a faded cap. "Are you all right?" he asked. I could not answer properly. I pointed towards the woods and tried to explain that something was beneath my house. He helped me into the passenger seat. The truck smelled of coffee and engine oil. He gave me water and drove towards town. During the journey, I told him everything. The missing objects, the footsteps, the empty medication bottle, the creature holding the spoon, the tunnels, the eyes. He did not laugh. He did not say I was imagining things. He only listened. When we reached his home, he allowed me to use his computer. That is where I am writing this now. I need to record everything while I still remember it. The man wants to call the police. He also wants to call a hospital. I understand why. I know what my medical records say. I know I missed my medication. I know an entire month disappeared from my memory. People are going to hear my story and believe my mind broke again. Maybe the cottage floor will be repaired when they arrive. Maybe the tunnels will be gone. Maybe every stolen object will return to its original place. But the cuts on my hands are real. The dirt beneath my nails is real. The blood on my clothes is real. I am not crazy. I am not crazy. I know what I saw. And I know those things are still beneath my house. Story 2. Hey, Internet, I need help figuring something out about the place where I work. Has anyone here ever worked in a store that sells almost anything? And when I say anything, I do not mean a Walmart, a giant supermarket, or one of those huge online shopping websites. I mean a shop that sells literally anything a person could ask for. Granola bars, light bulbs, shoes, medicine, birthday cards, power tools, and bottled water are all normal examples. The less normal examples include love potions, boxes that can show you your future, candles that summon dead relatives, mirrors that make people forget your face, and pills that allow you to breathe underwater. Yes, I am being serious. The store sells everything. I do not understand how. I do not understand where the products come from, how the shelves fit inside the building, or why the police never investigate the things that happen here. At first, I did not ask questions because I needed a job. Now I have so many questions that I do not even know where to begin. Has anyone worked at a place like this? Did your boss happen to be an extremely tall and thin man with a strange face? Did he make you call him boss instead of giving you his real name? Did the store have a pet frog? Did the back room sometimes seem larger than the whole building? Please tell me someone else has experienced this. I need to know I am not the only one. You are probably wondering who the tall man is. He is my boss. Obviously, no, I do not know his actual name. You may think that makes me an idiot, but that is how he introduced himself during my interview. I had applied for the job after seeing a handwritten advertisement taped to a streetlight. It said the store needed a cashier, no experience required. The hourly pay was not listed, but I was desperate enough to call the number anyway. I had been unemployed for nearly 2 months. My rent was overdue, my electricity company kept sending warnings, and I had about $11 in my bank account. The interview took place inside the shop. Boss was standing behind the counter when I entered. He had to be almost 7 feet tall. His arms were too long for his body, and his shoulders were so narrow that his dark suit hung from him like clothing on a wire frame. His face looked slightly twisted, as if someone had taken all his features and moved them a few inches from where they belonged. His eyes did not seem to point in exactly the same direction. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth were sharper than normal. Not vampire sharp exactly, more like the teeth of an animal that had learned to pretend it was human. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You may call me boss." I waited for him to give me a real name. He did not. Okay, I said. I had worked for strange people before. My previous manager believed birds were government machines and refused to stand near windows. Compared with him, a tall man who wanted to be called boss did not seem that unusual. The interview lasted less than 5 minutes. Boss asked whether I could read, count money, and remain calm when customers became difficult. I said yes to all three. He reached beneath the counter and placed the thick employment contract in front of me. Then he handed me a needle. "What's this for?" I asked. "I require you to sign in blood." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He did not laugh. The needle rested between his long fingers. His smile never changed. "Blood creates a stronger agreement than ink," he explained. "Now you are probably thinking there was no chance I signed it. Well, I needed the money. Please stop judging me. My landlord was threatening to throw me out. I had already borrowed money from my sister twice, and she had started ignoring my calls. When you are close to becoming homeless, a few drops of blood suddenly do not seem like the worst thing in the world." I pushed the needle into my thumb and signed. I should have read the contract first. I know that now. In my defense, it was nearly 50 pages long. The letters kept moving when I tried to focus on them, and some sections were written in a language that made my eyes hurt. Still, I signed. Maybe I am an idiot. That is not important right now. The important thing is that I need to find someone else who has worked for Boss before. I think I am in serious trouble. To understand why, you first need to understand what kind of store this is. When Boss claims we sell everything, he means it. One afternoon, a middle-aged man came into the shop. He was completely bald, with a smooth head that reflected the lights above him. He approached the counter and looked around nervously. "Do you have anything for hair growth?" he asked. By that point, I had already worked there for a few weeks. I had learned not to tell customers that something was impossible. I called Boss. "Do we have anything that grows hair?" Boss disappeared into a supply closet behind the counter. That closet should have been about 3 feet deep, based on the outside wall. Boss remained inside for nearly 10 minutes. During that time, I heard footsteps moving farther and farther away. Eventually, he returned holding a small silver container. It looked like an ordinary jar of skin cream, except the lid was warm and the cream inside moved slightly when no one touched it. "Give him this," Boss said. He did not explain how to use it. I sold the cream to the man for $20. He looked at the jar, then at me. "What do I do with it?" "I guess you rub it on your head." That seemed reasonable. The man left looking doubtful. The next morning, he returned. At first, I did not recognize him. He had thick brown hair covering his head. It looked healthy, clean, and perfectly styled. The man kept touching it and laughing. "It worked," he said. "This is incredible." He grabbed both of my hands and shook them. "Thank you. Thank you so much." He said the cream had given him everything he wanted. I was happy for him. For once, one of the magical products seemed to work without a terrible side effect. I should have known better. There is always a side effect. A few days later, the same man returned. This time, he was almost impossible to recognize. Do you remember those old cartoons where cavemen had hair hanging all the way to the ground? He looked like that. Hair covered his head, face, neck, arms, and most of his body. It dragged behind him as he walked. It wrapped around his legs and caused him to trip over himself. He tried to speak, but thick hair covered his mouth. Mmm. I asked him to repeat himself. He became angry. Mmm. He pointed at me and shook his fist. I think he was threatening to sue. The problem was that he could barely see through the hair covering his eyes. He stumbled into a display, knocked several boxes onto the floor, and then crashed headfirst into the supply closet. The impact caused a shelf above him to shake. 5 glass bottles fell. They shattered over his head. Each bottle contained a different potion. I will not describe exactly what happened next. I am not sure whether admitting it online could make me part of a criminal investigation. Let me just say that the shop has a pet frog. The frog lives in a large glass tank near the register. His name is Baldy. There is a reason we call him that. So yes, that is the type of place where I work. You may be wondering why I did not quit after the bald man became a frog. Money. I am extremely poor. I make minimum wage, but minimum wage is still better than no wage. My rent does not care whether my workplace is controlled by supernatural forces. I also made a mistake near the beginning of my employment. I stole money from the register. It was not a lot. At least, it did not feel like a lot at the time. The store had been busy. Boss had disappeared into the back room, and I was counting cash before closing. There were several $100s in the drawer. I needed money for rent. I took a few bills and put them into my pocket. I told myself I would return them after payday. I never did. This happened before I understood how dangerous the shop was. Back then, I thought Boss was simply an eccentric man who sold fake magic products to foolish customers. I did not think he noticed. He never mentioned missing money. He never checked the register totals. I am not sure he understands wages, taxes, labor laws, or modern banking. Sometimes he pays me in cash. Sometimes he places gold coins in my envelope and tells me to exchange them. Once, he tried to pay me with 3 teeth. I told him my landlord would not accept human teeth. Boss stared at them and said, "These are not human." That did not make me feel better. He eventually gave me money. Still, he does not pay me enough for what I deal with. During the summer, a man entered the shop on one of the hottest days of the year. He was sweating through his shirt and had a bright red face. He looked around the store and laughed. "What do you sell here?" he asked. "Everything," Boss answered. The man laughed even harder. "Everything?" Boss's face tightened. He does not like it when people doubt him. The man wiped sweat from his forehead. "All right. It's boiling outside. Give me a drink." Boss waited. The man grinned. "Give me the best soda I'll ever have." Boss turned and removed a bottle from beneath the counter. It was made from cloudy plastic. The liquid inside was bright blue and seemed to glow. Small points of light moved through it like stars. I assumed it was some kind of energy drink. The man opened it and took one sip. He made a face. Meh. That was the exact word he used. Boss stared at him. The man lifted the bottle to his mouth again. He started drinking. He did not stop. At first, I thought he was doing it to annoy Boss. Then I noticed the fear in his eyes. He was trying to pull the bottle away from his lips. His hands would not move. He continued swallowing. The bottle never emptied. Blue liquid kept flowing into his mouth. His stomach began to swell. I have never seen a human body expand that way. His shirt buttons broke. His arms pushed outward. His face became round and stretched. He continued drinking. I tried pulling the bottle from his hands, but it felt as if it were attached to him. Boss simply watched. By the time the paramedics arrived, the customer looked like a large exercise ball with arms and legs. The paramedics rushed through the entrance, carrying medical bags. One of them saw the man, then turned toward Boss. Again? She shouted. She did not sound surprised. She sounded tired. Boss shrugged. The paramedics exchanged an annoyed look. They rolled the man onto a stretcher, which was not easy considering his size, and took him outside. No police arrived. No investigation followed. The store was not closed. Nobody asked Boss where the drink came from. That was when I began wondering how much control he had over the town. The police ignored us. The hospital workers seemed familiar with him. Certain customers entered through doors that did not exist until they arrived. People sometimes disappeared after buying products, yet their families never came looking. I became nervous. Customers did not always pay with money, especially when they bought extraordinary products. Sometimes Boss asked for a memory. Sometimes he asked for a promise. Once he asked a woman for the sound of her first child's laugh. She agreed. After she left, she stood outside, crying, because she could no longer remember what her son sounded like. I had taken money from the register. I did not know what punishment Boss used for theft. I only knew what happened to customers who failed to understand the price. Boss himself was difficult to understand. His face was crooked, his limbs were too long, and his teeth looked wrong. But the worst thing about him was the strange comments he made without explanation. One evening, while I was cleaning the counter, he suddenly turned toward me. "Do you know of the one who waits?" he asked. I stopped wiping the surface. "No," he studied my face. A shame." Then he smiled. "I suppose it is not yet time." "What isn't time?" He walked away. I followed him. "Who is the one who waits?" Boss opened the supply closet. "You will understand when you are required to understand." Then he stepped inside and disappeared. I heard the sound of something enormous breathing in the darkness beyond the doorway. I closed it. Does any of this sound familiar to anyone? I have more examples. A man once entered the store with his daughter. I had seen them before. He was the type of person who always looked angry. His clothes were dirty. His truck was falling apart. And he spoke to everyone as though they had personally insulted him. He came in looking for a pair of pliers. His daughter was probably 7 or 8. She noticed a row of dolls near the front window. "Can I have one?" she asked. "No," the man shouted. The girl lowered her head. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the shelf. I saw dark bruises across her shoulder where her shirt had slipped down. I do not mean he was simply strict. He hurt her. It was obvious. A few weeks earlier, I had heard the girl ask him for a puppy. He yelled at her in the middle of the shop. "You can't even take care of yourself. Why would I get you a dog?" She started crying. He dragged her outside. Boss had watched the entire thing. When the man returned for pliers, Boss sold him exactly what he requested. Nothing strange happened inside the shop. The customer left, pulling his daughter behind him. Boss smiled as they walked away. That smile made me nervous. The next morning, something covered in thick brown hair entered the store. For one horrible moment, I thought the bald customer had somehow changed back from a frog. Then I realized the hair was not growing from the creature's head. It covered its entire body. The thing walked on 2 legs, but its posture was bent. Hair grew across its hands, face, neck, and chest. Its nose looked wet and dark. I recognized the dirty sleeveless shirt beneath the fur. It was the abusive father. He pointed at me. "What the rough did you sell me?" I stared at him. "What?" He barked. An actual bark came from his mouth. He tried speaking again, but each sentence included growls and barking sounds. "You roughing bastard." He sounded like a badly acted cartoon dog. The situation would have been funny if he had not been moving toward me with his fists raised. Before he could reach the counter, Boss appeared. The man growled. Boss reached into his pocket and removed a dog biscuit. The man stopped immediately. His eyes locked onto the treat. Boss held it above his head. "Sit," the man sat. "Good boy." The creature lifted both hands and begged. Boss gave him the biscuit and patted his head. The man's leg began tapping against the floor. I do not think I will ever recover from watching that. After eating the biscuit, the man walked outside on all fours. I never saw him again. I still see his daughter sometimes. She walks along the street near the store. She always looks happier now. She is usually holding a puppy on a red leash. That is what confuses me about Boss. Sometimes he gives people exactly what they deserve. Other times, he destroys people for making small mistakes. He can be cruel, kind, funny, or terrifying. I never know which version of him I am dealing with. I suppose I should care more. But again, I make minimum wage. A woman came into the store yesterday. She was probably in her 50s. She looked exhausted and had clearly been crying. Her husband had recently left her for a younger woman. She stood at the counter for a while before speaking. "Do you have anything that could make me beautiful?" she asked. I prepared myself for another disaster. By then, I understood how the store worked. I expected Boss to give her a magical cream that removed every mark from her face until her entire face disappeared. Maybe he would sell her perfume that made every man fall in love with her until a crowd tore her apart. Perhaps he would give her a necklace that restored her youth while stealing years from her remaining life. I waited. Boss stepped forward and looked at her. "You are already lovely, my dear," he said. The woman blinked. "You do not need anything from this shop." She looked down. My husband didn't think so. Boss's sharp smile softened. "Then your husband was a fool." The woman began crying again, but this time she smiled. Boss handed her a clean cloth from beneath the counter. "Do not allow one unpleasant person to decide your worth." He spoke for several minutes about how society placed unfair pressure on women to remain young and beautiful. I am paraphrasing. Boss uses old words that nobody understands. But his message was surprisingly kind. The woman left without buying anything. She was smiling when she walked outside. Another satisfied customer, I suppose. I looked at Boss. "Are you a feminist?" He stared at me. "What is a feminist?" I tried to explain. He became bored halfway through and started feeding Baldy. I think Boss needs to spend more time outside. Anyway, that should explain my situation. Does anyone recognize this man? Have you worked for him? Did he also require a blood signature? Did customers sometimes enter looking for impossible things? Did the store move to a different street even though nobody moved the building? Did your employment contract whisper when you tried to sleep? I need answers. Boss told me this morning that he wanted to speak with me later in the afternoon. He said it casually, but something about his voice made me nervous. Maybe I am imagining things. Maybe he wants to discuss my schedule. Maybe he wants to give me a raise. That last possibility is probably the least realistic. Please respond if any of this sounds familiar. My name is Chris. I will check the comments later. Chris out. I was going to wait before writing more, but something just happened. Boss still seemed unaware of the money I stole. He acted completely normal all morning. He sold a customer a jar filled with good luck, although I am pretty sure the jar was actually full of teeth. He complained that I had placed the emergency curses too close to the children's candy. He asked whether I had cleaned the basement. We do not have a basement. At least, I did not think we did. Nothing suggested he knew about the cash. I started to believe I had worried for no reason. Maybe Boss really had not noticed. Maybe I was safe. Wait. He is calling me now. I can hear him from the back of the store. He just said my name. I do not know how he knows that I am writing this. There are no cameras inside the shop. I checked. Boss was not even here when I started posting. I saw him leave through the supply closet hours ago. But now his office door is open. I have never seen that door before. It is between the drinks refrigerator and the shelf where we keep birthday candles. There has always been a wall there. Now there's a black wooden door. My name is carved into it. Chris, the letters look fresh. Something wet is running from them. Boss called me again. His voice did not come from behind the door. It came from the phone in my hand. I did not answer a call. There is no call on the screen. Still, I heard him clearly. Come into my office, Chris. I am standing behind the counter. The front door will not open. I tried. The lock has disappeared. The windows show darkness outside, even though it is still afternoon. Baldy is staring at me from his tank. He keeps throwing his body against the glass. I think he is trying to warn me. Or maybe he remembers what happened when he was human. The black door has opened a little wider. There is no office behind it. There are stairs going down. They continue farther than I can see. Something is waiting at the bottom. I can hear chains moving. Boss is standing in the doorway now. He is smiling. I asked him how he knew. I asked whether he had always known about the money. He tilted his head. His neck made a cracking sound. Then he said, I know everything purchased, everything taken, and everything owed. I told him I could return it. I still have some of the money. He laughed. It was the first time I had ever heard him laugh. The shelves shook. Several jars started screaming. I asked how much I owed. He reached into his coat and removed my employment contract. It was much thicker than I remembered. The blood I used to sign my name was still wet. Boss opened it to the final page. There was a section I had not noticed before. Payment for theft will not be taken in currency. I asked what he wanted. He looked toward the dark stairs. Something below us spoke. It used my voice. Boss looked back at me. Do you remember when I asked if you knew of the one who waits? I could not answer. He smiled wider. It knows of you. I should run. There is nowhere to go. I thought about breaking a window, but when I looked through the glass, I saw the shop from the outside. I saw myself standing behind the counter. But there was another version of me standing beside Boss. That Chris was smiling. His teeth were sharp. Boss stepped aside and pointed down the stairs. The store lights are turning off one at a time. He is still calm. I think that is the worst part. He is not angry about the money. He is not surprised. He always knew. Maybe stealing from him was not a mistake. Maybe it was part of the contract. Maybe he hired me because he knew I would become desperate enough to take it. I asked him what would happen if I refused. He said, "You already agreed." The blood on the contract moved across the paper. It formed new words. My name. My address. the names of my parents, the exact amount of money I stole. Then it wrote something else. Employee position available. I asked boss what that meant. He looked at the empty space beside him. A white shirt and black jacket appeared there, hanging in the air as if worn by an invisible body. They were my size. Boss stretched out one long hand. His fingers are reaching toward me now. I do not think he wants the money. I think he wants a replacement. I think the man I saw in the window is going to work here after I go down those stairs. If someone finds this post, do not answer any job advertisement attached to a streetlight. Do not enter a shop that claims to sell everything. Do not sign anything in blood. And if a tall man with a crooked face asks whether you know of the one who waits, do not say no. Do not say anything. Just leave. Boss is standing directly in front of me now. He has placed his hand on my shoulder. His fingers are cold. The thing below the shop has started laughing with my voice. Boss has only said one thing. Come, Chris, he is pulling me toward the stairs. It is time for you to pay. Shit, story 3. Do you want to know why people start gardening? It is because they want control. People will tell you it is because they enjoy watching something grow. They will say they love flowers, fresh vegetables, or spending time outdoors. Those things might be true, but they are not the real reason. Control is at the root of it all. Excuse the joke. You can walk through any public park and see hundreds of flowers without lifting a finger. You can visit a farmer's market and buy tomatoes, peppers, or the freshest zucchini you have ever tasted. You can enjoy nature without digging a single hole or getting dirt beneath your nails. But that is not enough. You want the flowers growing in your pot. You want the vegetables coming from your backyard. You want to decide where they are planted, how much water they receive, and when they are ready to be cut. Nature exists everywhere, free for you to enjoy, but gardeners want a say in what happens to it. I know because I started gardening 1 month after I lost my job. Before that, I had worked for the same company for nearly 12 years. I was not rich, and I did not love the work, but it gave my life a routine. I woke up at the same time every morning, drove the same route, sat at the same desk, and complained about the same problems. Then the company announced budget cuts. My manager called me into his office on a Wednesday afternoon. He would not look directly at me while he explained that my position had been removed. He kept saying it was not personal. It felt very personal. Within 5 minutes, 12 years of my life were packed into a cardboard box. After losing my job, everything became uncertain. I did not know whether I would be able to pay the mortgage in 6 months. I did not know how long my savings would last. I sent applications to dozens of companies and received polite rejection emails in return. Every part of my life felt as if it belonged to someone else. That was why I wanted a garden. I wanted one small thing I could look at and say, I made that happen. Something I could control. Something that would still be there the next morning. Because I had decided it should be. I did not know anything about gardening, so I started small. I searched online for flowers that could survive the hot summers in my area. After several hours of reading, I chose 2 native plants, yellow brown-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers. I thought the colors would look good together. The following morning, I drove to a local plant nursery on the edge of town. It was a small place surrounded by tall wooden fencing. Rows of flowers sat beneath green shade cloths, and the air smelled of wet soil and fertilizer. There was only one employee inside the shop. She sat behind the counter wearing large headphones. She looked to be in her late 60s, with long gray hair tied behind her head and dirt beneath her fingernails. A small plastic name tag pinned to her shirt read Mabel. "Hi," I said, waving. "How are you?" She looked up and gave me a lazy smile. Then she pulled one headphone away from her ear. A deafening sound burst from it. It sounded like a scream, but not the kind a person makes when they are frightened. It was long, flat, and empty. The same note continued without changing, as though someone had recorded a human scream and stretched it until it no longer sounded human. The noise came from the phone in her pocket. Mabel quickly pressed the volume button. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "No problem." I laughed awkwardly, but the sound had made my stomach tighten. "Was that music?" I asked. She stared at me for a moment. "Something like that." She looked down at the plants I had placed on the counter. "No fertilizer?" "I didn't buy any. You'll need it." "Do I?" "If you want to be sure they grow." She tapped one finger against the plastic pot holding a coneflower. "This summer is going to be hot. Very hot. You don't want to leave these little things to chance, do you?" The way she asked made it sound as though there was only one correct answer. "I guess not," I said. "What do you recommend?" Mabel leaned beneath the counter and brought out a plain brown paper bag. The words "Mabel's Magic" were written across it in black marker. "My personal mixture," she said. "I make it myself." There was no list of ingredients, no instructions, no company information. I picked up the bag and squeezed it. It felt like heavy soil. Something inside moved beneath my fingers, but I assumed it was only loose material shifting around. "How much do I use?" "Mix a little into every hole." "How much is a little?" Mabel smiled. "The plants will take what they need." That should have sounded strange. Instead, her confidence made me feel safe. She spoke as though there was no possibility of failure. The bag began to feel like a promise. If I used it, everything would grow. "Okay," I said. "I'll take it." Her smile widened slightly. "I thought you would." When I left the nursery, I looked back through the shop window. Mabel had put her headphones on again. Even through the glass, I could hear the faint sound of that endless scream. By sunset, my garden was finished. I had planted 12 flowers in a neat row along the edge of my backyard. 6 brown-eyed Susans and 6 coneflowers. I carefully mixed Mabel's magic into every hole. The fertilizer smelled strange. It was not the sharp chemical smell I expected. It smelled damp and warm, almost like the inside of an animal's mouth. I found several pale pieces mixed into it. They looked like small roots, although they were soft when I pressed them between my fingers. I buried them with the flowers. When the last plant was in place, I stood back and took a photograph. The garden was small, but it was mine. For the next several weeks, I became completely focused on those flowers. Every morning, I checked the soil before breakfast. Every evening, I inspected the leaves for insects. During dry weather, I watered them carefully. During storms, I watched through the window and worried that the heavy rain would damage them. They grew quickly, much faster than I had expected. Every day, the stems seemed a little taller. New leaves appeared overnight. The brown-eyed Susans became thick and healthy, their yellow flowers bright enough to see from the kitchen window. The coneflowers followed close behind. Within a month, some of the plants were nearly 3 feet tall. Neighbors commented on them. One woman asked what kind of fertilizer I used. I almost told her. but something stopped me. Maybe I wanted to keep the secret for myself. The garden had become the only successful part of my life. I still did not have a job, but the flowers grew because of me. At least, that was what I believed. The trouble began in June. The temperature climbed above 100 degrees for several days in a row. The grass turned brown, and the air remained hot even after sunset. Some of the coneflowers started to wilt. Their leaves hung low, and their stems leaned toward the ground. I panicked more than I should have. The garden was the one thing I had managed to keep alive. Watching it fail felt like losing control all over again. I searched online for advice. The first instruction said to check the moisture in the soil. Push 2 or 3 fingers into the dirt. If the soil is dry several inches beneath the surface, the plant needs more water. Easy enough. I went outside and knelt beside the weakest coneflower. The top layer of soil was dry. I pressed 2 fingers deeper. The dirt remained warm and dusty. Then my fingertips touched something hard. No, not hard exactly. Rubbery, I pushed slightly farther. Something moved across my fingers. I pulled my hand out. What the hell? The soil had been dry, but my fingers were covered in a clear, sticky liquid. I wiped them on my pants. For one strange second, I thought something had licked my hand. I looked at the ground around me. My gardening shears were beside the flower bed. My small trough and gloves were nearby. Why am I not wearing these? I muttered. I forced myself to laugh. 1 month of gardening, and I was still making beginner mistakes. Maybe I had touched a large worm. But worms were soft. Whatever was beneath the soil had felt thick and firm. I picked up my gloves, but before putting them on, I looked at the coneflower again. The stem moved. There was no wind. The leaves trembled as though the plant were preparing itself for something. It looked nervous. That thought made no sense. Plants did not become nervous. Still, I wanted to know what was under the soil. It was my garden. I had planted every flower and mixed the fertilizer myself. I had the right to know what was growing beneath it. I pressed my hand into the small hole my fingers had created. The soil was strangely loose beneath the surface. My hand slid down farther than expected. Then my fingers wrapped around something long and rounded. It moved immediately. The object twisted in a slow circle, trying to escape my grip. This is not a worm. I leaned forward and pushed my other hand against the ground for balance. The thing beneath the soil pulled downward. I tightened my grip. For a moment, it felt as though we were fighting each other. Then, my hand slipped. A sharp snapping sound came from beneath the ground. It sounded exactly like a carrot breaking in half. Pain exploded through my hand. I screamed and pulled my arm back. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. Then, I counted my fingers. 4. My thumb was gone. Blood poured from the side of my hand. I continued screaming. A second voice joined me. It came from beneath the coneflower. The scream was deeper than mine and filled with rage. The sound shook the soil. Every flower in the garden began to move. The stems bent and twisted. Leaves shook violently. The ground beneath the flower bed rose and fell as though something enormous were breathing underneath it. I stumbled backward, holding my injured hand against my chest. The coneflower I had been inspecting lifted out of the ground. Its roots were wrapped around something gray. A bald head pushed through the hole. For a second, only the top of its skull was visible. Then it moved from side to side, forcing the opening wider. Soil fell away from a bare brow. 2 deep eye sockets appeared. Inside them were pale white eyes, wide with anger. I backed away. My missing thumb and the blood running down my arm were more than enough proof, but my mind still refused to accept what I was seeing. There was a man beneath my garden. His skin was gray-green and covered in wet soil. Thin roots crossed his face like veins. He opened his mouth and screamed again. It looked as though that mouth had never been closed before. The corners were cracked and stretched nearly to his ears. I covered my ears and ran toward the deck. Behind me, the ground tore open. At the top of the stairs, I turned around. The man had pushed one arm through the hole. It was much longer than a normal human arm. The joints bent in strange places, allowing him to reach across the flower bed and grip the soil. The ground stretched around his body like skin. He dragged himself upward. His shoulders appeared next, followed by a thin chest covered in dark roots and patches of moss. He never looked away from me. He did not stop screaming. I did not wait to see the rest. I ran into the house and slammed the sliding glass door shut. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out, but my injured hand could not hold it properly. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. I dropped to my knees. Blood fell onto the screen as I picked it up. I began dialing 911. Then the room became dark. The lights were still on. Something was blocking the sunlight behind me. Before I could turn around, the glass door shook. The gray-green man stood on the deck. His entire body was visible now. He was tall but painfully thin. His arms nearly reached his knees. Soil and small stones fell from his skin. Roots hung from his back and dragged across the wooden boards. He struck the glass with both hands. The door shook in its frame. His face was twisted with anger, and his mouth remained open in an endless scream. I pressed the call button. The phone started ringing. The moment the first ring sounded, the man stopped. His hands remained against the glass. His scream ended. He simply stared at me. That sudden silence was somehow worse. 10 minutes of panic became a cold feeling of waiting. I was still terrified, but for the first time I thought I might be able to speak. A dispatcher answered. 911, what is your emergency? There is a man in my backyard, I said quickly. He came out of the ground and bit me. I'm bleeding. I need an ambulance. The words sounded insane. The dispatcher remained calm. Slow down. Are you inside a safe location? Yes, I'm inside my house. Is the man outside? He's standing right in front of the glass door. Does he have a weapon? No. I looked at my missing thumb. He bit me. Can he enter the house? I don't think so. The door is locked. What is your address? I gave it to her. We are sending officers now. And an ambulance, I said. Please send an ambulance. One is already on the way. She asked me to find a clean towel and apply pressure to my hand. I moved toward the kitchen while keeping my eyes on the glass door. The man watched me. His pale eyes did not blink. I opened the freezer and searched for an ice pack. When I looked back, he was moving. He stepped backward down the deck stairs. His expression had changed. He no longer looked angry. Now he appeared serious. Patient. He kept his eyes on me the entire time. At the bottom of the stairs, he turned toward the flower bed. The hole was still open. He placed his left foot inside. His body dropped into the soil up to his hip. Then he lifted his other leg and squeezed it into the opening. The hole was far too small, but the ground stretched around him. His shoulders disappeared. Then, his neck. For several seconds, only his head remained above the soil. He tilted his face toward the sun. Then he looked back at me. His mouth slowly closed. The skin around it cracked and split as his lips met for what might have been the first time. Then he sank beneath the dirt. The hole closed behind him. "Sir?" The dispatcher asked. "Are you still there?" I had forgotten about the phone. He went back. Who went back? The man. Where did he go? Into the ground. Red and blue lights flashed against the fence. I did not know whether to feel relieved or afraid of what the police would think. I tried to stand, but the room tilted. My knees weakened. The last thing I remember was the dispatcher calling my name while I fell beside the kitchen counter. I woke in a hospital. 2 police officers stood beside my bed with a nurse. My hand was wrapped in thick bandages, and a tube ran into my arm. The nurse explained that I had lost a dangerous amount of blood. My thumb was completely gone, and because it had not been recovered, the doctors had been unable to reattach it. After asking several basic questions, the officers wanted to hear the story. I told them everything. At first, they listened quietly. Then, one officer began asking the same questions in different ways. "So you saw a man in your backyard?" "Yes." "And he bit your hand?" "No, he bit my hand first." Then I pulled back and saw him coming out of the ground. The officer looked at his partner. They had searched my backyard. The flower bed was destroyed. Several plants had been uprooted. Blood covered the deck and some of the gardening tools. My shears had blood on them, too. "Are you sure you did not cut yourself?" the officer asked. "What? These tools are sharp." The temperature was over 100 degrees. You lost a lot of blood. Heat and blood loss can cause confusion. You think I imagined him? I'm saying it is possible you injured yourself and became disoriented. If I cut myself, where's my thumb? The officer leaned forward. "If a man attacked you, where is he?" I opened my mouth. The answer sounded stupid, even inside my head. He went back into the hole. I looked down at my bandaged hand. "I don't know," I said. The officer's expression softened. "If someone comes back, call us immediately." I stared at him. "Strange things happen," he continued. "We understand that. But right now, we do not have evidence that another person was there." They left soon afterward. I spent 2 more days in the hospital. During that time, I called the nursery. No one answered. I searched online for Mabel's business, but the nursery did not have a website. The address appeared on a few old maps, but every listing said it had closed more than 10 years earlier. I asked the nurse to search for it on her phone in case I was doing something wrong. She found the same result: closed permanently. When I was released, I drove past the location. The wooden fence was still there, but the gate was locked. Most of the plants were dead. The shop windows were covered with dust. A faded sign hung on the door: "Property condemned." I looked through the glass. The counter was empty. Then I saw a brown paper bag sitting on the floor. Mabel's magic. Something inside the bag moved. I left. I am writing this from my house now. The garden is visible through the sliding glass door. It is a complete mess. Several flowers are lying on the ground. Soil covers the deck stairs. Brown blood stains remain between the boards. Even though I have tried washing them away, I should clean everything. I should pull out the plants and dig up the entire flower bed. I should fill the hole with concrete. But I cannot make myself go outside. The flowers have continued growing. The coneflowers are taller than the fence now. Their stems are thick and gray beneath the leaves. The brown-eyed Susans turned toward the house instead of the sun. Sometimes I see the soil moving beneath them, slow circles, like something turning over in its sleep. The police came back once after a neighbor reported hearing screaming from my yard. By the time they arrived, everything was quiet. They looked around for 5 minutes and left. Last night, I heard tapping against the glass. The gray-green man was not there. It was only a coneflower. Its stem had bent across the deck until its flower touched the door. Tap, tap, tap. When I stepped closer, the purple petals opened. There was something white in the center. At first, I thought it was a pale seed. Then I recognized the shape of a fingernail. My fingernail. I could see the rest of my thumb beneath the center of the flower, wrapped in tiny roots. I almost opened the door. I wanted it back. That was when the leaves in the garden began shaking. There was no wind. The coneflower pressed harder against the glass. A voice came from beneath the soil. It sounded angry at first. Then it became softer, almost friendly. You planted us. I backed away. The voice continued. You fed us. The flower tapped the glass again. You wanted control. All 12 plants turned toward me. The soil rose around their roots. Something large moved beneath the entire garden bed. I closed the curtains. I have not opened them since. But I can still hear the leaves moving. Sometimes I hear fingers scratching beneath the deck. I tell myself I should sell the house. I tell myself I should burn the garden. But I know the truth. It is not my garden anymore. It never was. It belongs to him. Story 4. I had to move to the West Coast about a year ago because of work. Before that, I had heard people complain about rent in the area, but I never really understood how bad it was. I assumed they were exaggerating. People like to complain about money, especially online. I thought I would find something small, maybe a studio with an old kitchen and a bad view, and that would be the end of it. Then I started looking at apartment listings. Pardon my language, but the whole situation was freaking ridiculous. My job requires a graduate degree. I spent years in school, collected enough student debt to frighten a banker, and found a position that was supposed to be respectable. Still, some apartments wanted more in monthly rent than I earned in an entire month. That was before food, gas, electricity, insurance, and all the other things people apparently need to survive. After a week of searching, I began to accept that I would be living on rice and beans for the next several years. Maybe I would buy 1 chocolate bar a month if I was feeling especially rich. I was already planning which meals I could skip without passing out at work. I am not a difficult person when it comes to comfort. I can sleep on airplanes. I once slept through most of a 13-hour flight while sitting beside a crying baby. If the apartment did not have enough room for a real bed, I was prepared to sleep inside a closet or under a kitchen table. The point is, I was ready to suffer. Then, during one of my late-night searches, a light appeared in the darkness. That light came in the form of a Craigslist advertisement. The rent was listed as $200 a month. I stared at the number for several seconds, waiting for my tired eyes to correct themselves. I refreshed the page. It still said 200. I zoomed in because I thought perhaps there was a missing zero. There was not. The photographs made the listing even more unbelievable. The apartment had a real kitchen, not just a microwave balanced on top of a mini refrigerator. It had a private bathroom, wooden floors, a decent-sized bedroom, and a balcony. There was even enough room in the living room for furniture. Compared to the other places I had seen, It looked like a luxury hotel. Obviously, my first thought was that it had to be a scam. Perhaps they would ask for a deposit before the tour and then disappear. Maybe the pictures had been stolen from another listing. There was also the possibility that the apartment was located beneath a nightclub, beside a chemical factory, or directly over a sinkhole. But desperate people cannot afford to ignore miracles. I contacted the person who had posted the advertisement. I said I was interested in viewing the apartment. I also gave them some background information. I explained that I lived on the other side of the country, that I was currently in town searching for a place because of my new job, and that I had limited time. I tried to sound professional, but also slightly desperate and pitiful. I received a reply in less than a minute. The message asked whether I could come for a tour that afternoon. Naturally, I said yes. When I arrived at the building, I realized I was not the only person who had discovered the advertisement. A line stretched from the entrance into the parking lot. There were college students, families, office workers, and at least one elderly man holding a folding chair. The building management had created a ticket system like the DMV. A woman sitting behind a small table handed me a paper with the number 87 written on it. I asked what number they were currently serving. She pointed at a screen. It said 63. I waited for nearly an hour. During that time, I listened to the other applicants talk. Everyone was convinced there had to be some hidden problem. One man thought the building was scheduled for demolition. A woman said the apartment was probably haunted. Someone else suggested the rent was only $200 for the first week. I did not care. At that price, I was willing to share the apartment with a ghost, as long as the ghost paid for the internet. Eventually, my number appeared on the screen. I was directed upstairs and into the apartment. A large man was waiting inside. He wore a gray suit that was too tight around the stomach, and his face was so round that his cheeks almost covered his small ears. His forehead was shiny with sweat. He introduced himself as the landlord. The apartment looked exactly like the photographs. I checked the kitchen. It was real. I turned on the bathroom faucet. Water came out. I opened the balcony door and stepped outside. The balcony was small, but it existed. I asked the landlord several times whether the rent was truly $200 a month. He seemed amused by my disbelief. Yes, he said. $200. No hidden fees. What about utilities? Some are included. Parking? Also included. Is the building being condemned? No. Was someone murdered here? Not recently. I laughed, but he did not. Then he explained there was one condition. He called it microtenancy. According to him, it was a new rental system that the company was testing. I would be the primary tenant, which meant I could live in the apartment full time. However, other people could pay to use small portions of the apartment for short periods. For example, someone might pay to use the shower for 30 minutes. A tired traveler could rent the bed for an hour-long nap. Someone without exercise equipment might pay to use a machine in the living room. The landlord said the money from these temporary visitors would make up for the extremely low rent. The arrangement sounded completely absurd. So strangers will have access to the apartment? I asked. Yes, even when I'm not here? Sometimes, what if I'm using the room they rented? You will be notified when possible. When possible. The system is still being developed. He smiled and spread his hands. It is mutually beneficial. We make more money by renting small sections of the apartment, and you receive an excellent home for almost nothing. I looked around again. The apartment was larger than every other place I had seen, and the rent was less than what some people paid for a storage unit. I told the landlord his idea was brilliant. I also told him I had no problem sharing the apartment with short-term visitors. I imagined someone arriving once or twice a week to use the shower. It might be awkward, but awkwardness was a small price to pay for affordable housing. The landlord asked several questions about me. He wanted to know my age, medical history, sleeping habits, daily schedule, and whether I lived alone. Some questions seemed too personal, but I assumed the company wanted to be careful when selecting someone for such an unusual arrangement. He took a photograph of me and recorded my height and weight. Then he shook my hand. "We will contact you if you are chosen as the primary tenant," he said. I spent the rest of the day touring other apartments. Each one was worse than the last. One studio cost nearly $4,000 a month and had no oven. Another had a shower head directly above the toilet. The agent called it efficient use of space. By evening, I had accepted that I was probably not getting the cheap apartment. There had been too many applicants. I was nobody special. The following morning, the landlord called. He said he had been impressed with me the moment we met. When he shook my hand, he knew I was the perfect fit. I should have wondered what that meant. Instead, I thanked him repeatedly. 1 month later, I moved in. The first week was peaceful. I unpacked my things, bought a couch, and brought over the elliptical trainer I had kept in storage. I expected visitors immediately, but none came. Then they started arriving. The first was a woman who used my bathroom for 20 minutes. She entered with her own towel, nodded at me, and left without speaking. The next person was an older man who rented my bed for an afternoon nap. He removed his shoes, lay down fully dressed, and slept for exactly 45 minutes. A young couple came to sit on my balcony and watch the sunset. Another man paid to use my kitchen table for a job interview. It felt strange, but not dangerous. The visitors appeared to get something useful from the apartment. I told myself I was helping people while also saving money. Still, it was always surprising to return from work and find a stranger sitting on my couch. Sometimes I tried to talk to them. "Long day?" I would ask. They usually stared at me with an uncomfortable expression. It was as though they understood the arrangement was weird, but did not want to admit it. Those were the normal visitors. As the months passed, more people began arriving. Their reasons for being there became harder to understand. Some entered while I was exercising and stood silently near the wall, watching me use the elliptical trainer. They did not use any equipment. They simply watched until their rented time ended. Others brought sketchbooks and drew pictures of me while I ate dinner. One woman sat cross-legged on the floor and took notes every time I chewed. A teenage boy rented the kitchen sink, but never turned on the water. He leaned over it and whispered into the drain. I caught an elderly man trying to steal my socks. When I confronted him, he placed them back in the drawer and left without saying anything. Another visitor entered the bathroom while I was showering and began tapping on the glass. I shouted at him to leave. He stared through the fogged door and continued tapping until his time expired. I considered reporting these incidents to the landlord. The trouble was that I was afraid he might decide I was not suitable for the program. Losing the apartment would mean returning to the normal rental market. So I stayed quiet. None of the visitors had directly harmed me. They were creepy, rude, and confusing, but that was all. At least, that was what I told myself. Then one night, I woke to someone touching my face. At first, I thought I was dreaming. There was a strange pressure against my cheeks. Something soft moved across my skin in slow circles. When I opened my eyes, a person was standing over the bed. The room was dark, but I could see the shape of their head and shoulders. Both of their hands were pressed against my face. I sat up so quickly that our foreheads nearly collided. The visitor made a high, frightened sound and stepped back. "Who are you?" I shouted. The person turned and ran. I was still half asleep. I was also completely naked, which made chasing a stranger through the building more difficult than it should have been. By the time I reached the front door, the hallway was empty. The lock had not been broken. That did not matter. Every registered visitor had a key. I closed the door and pushed the couch in front of it. Then I sat there until sunrise, unable to return to sleep. As soon as I finished work the next day, I went directly to the landlord's office. I told him everything. To his credit, he appeared shocked. His round face turned bright red, and he apologized several times. "That behavior was completely unacceptable," he said. "No microtenant has permission to touch you while you sleep." "That sentence should never need to be said," I replied. "You are absolutely correct." He promised the visitor would be banned. He also offered to reduce my rent by 50% for the month. Since I only paid $200, the discount was not life-changing. Still, $100 was $100. The landlord sounded sincere. Even so, something had changed inside my mind. Until then, I had assumed the visitors only came during the day or early evening. Now I wondered how many people had entered while I slept. I bought a night vision security camera and placed it in the corner of my bedroom. I let it record for several nights. When I reviewed the footage, I almost vomited. The visitors came every night. Sometimes one person entered. Sometimes there were several. They stood around my bed and watched me sleep. They did nothing else. They did not touch me, speak, or move closer. They simply stood in the darkness and stared. Some stayed for a few minutes. Others remained for hours. One woman stood at the foot of my bed from 1:17 in the morning until nearly 5. I watched the footage again and again, trying to find a harmless explanation. Maybe it was a sleep study. Maybe they were artists. Maybe there was some strange online trend I did not understand. Then I reminded myself that I was only paying 200 buckarooskies a month. That kind of rent can make a person ignore many warning signs. The next night, I decided to pretend I was asleep. I lay beneath the blanket, with my eyes closed, listening carefully. At around 2 in the morning, I heard the front door unlock. Soft footsteps crossed the apartment. Someone entered the bedroom and stopped beside the wall. A few minutes later, the door opened again. More footsteps. Then another visitor arrived. And another. Soon, I could hear breathing from every part of the room. My fear slowly changed into anger. I had allowed strangers into my home. I had stayed silent while they watched me, drew me, touched my belongings, and entered my bathroom. Now they were surrounding my bed in the middle of the night. Finally, I snapped. I threw off the blanket and jumped up. Several people gasped. I pushed through the crowd and stood in front of the bedroom door, blocking the exit. Then, I turned on the light. There were around 10 people in the room. Men and women of different ages stood around my bed. Some wore coats. Others were dressed in simple shirts and pants. One man carried a notebook. They all stared at me. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. "What the fuck are you people doing here?" I demanded. I tried to sound frightening, although I am only 5 feet 9 inches tall and was wearing boxer shorts with cartoon sharks on them. The visitors did not react. Then I noticed something strange about one of them. She appeared to be a woman in her late 30s. Her dark hair hung just above her shoulders. At first glance, she looked ordinary, but the skin around her eyes was sagging. It hung lower than it should have, as though it had come loose from her skull. I looked at the others. Their faces seemed normal. Only hers looked wrong. Without thinking about the law, safety, or common sense, I lunged toward her. I grabbed both sides of her face. The other visitors immediately rushed past me and escaped through the doorway. The woman screamed and began speaking in a language that sounded like Italian, although I am fairly sure it was not. I had not touched many women in my life, but I immediately knew something was wrong. Her skin was too loose. It moved beneath my hands like wet rubber. Something was also moving underneath it. Dozens of small shapes twisted and pushed against my fingers. The woman struggled harder. I tightened my grip and pulled. Her entire head came off. For a moment, I believed I'd killed her. Then I realized I was holding a mask. It was made from soft rubber and looked incredibly realistic, like something used in a movie. It had hair, eyelashes, teeth, and a complete human face. The woman stood in front of me without it. There was no human head beneath the mask. A mass of worms rose from her neck. They were pale, wet, and constantly moving. Some were thick as fingers, while others were as thin as string. They twisted together, forming the rough shape of a head. Several opened small black mouths. I froze. The creature used that moment to push past me. As it ran, the worms bent backward like hair in the wind. It disappeared through the front door. I stood in the bedroom, holding the rubber face. I had no idea what to do next. Eventually, I dropped the mask, ran to the kitchen, and grabbed the largest knife I owned. I sat in front of the door for the rest of the night. No one else came. In the morning, someone knocked. I nearly had a heart attack. Then the landlord announced himself. I put on clothes, moved the couch, and let him inside. I expected him to explain everything. Instead, he handed me an eviction notice. I read it twice. "What is this?" I asked. "You attacked one of the microtinates." Now that I was facing homelessness, I immediately regretted my actions. "I didn't attack her for no reason," I said. "She wasn't human." The landlord nodded. "She had worms for a head." I know. His answer made me stop. "You know?" He smiled. I began speaking faster. "Okay, maybe they aren't human. Fine, that's fine. I understand now. I won't cause trouble again." The landlord's smile grew wider. I dropped to my knees. I am not proud of that, but the rental market can destroy a person's dignity. "Please," I said, "I don't care what they are. They can keep visiting. I'll behave normally." "That is the problem," he replied. His small eyes seemed to shine. "Now you know too much. I can pretend I don't." "No, you can't." "Yes, I can. You will act differently," he said. "Unnaturally, they will notice. They already act unnatural. They are paying customers." I stared up at him. He turned toward the door. "It is a shame," he said. "You were quite popular." Then he waddled out of the apartment. That happened a few days ago. I now have 3 days left before I must leave. There have been no visitors since the night I pulled off the woman's face. The apartment feels strangely empty without them. Still, I see people outside. Sometimes they stand across the street and stare at my windows. Others watch from parked cars. Last night, I saw a man wearing a shirt with my face printed on the front. It was not a normal photograph. It showed me sleeping, my mouth slightly open. When he noticed me looking, he lifted one hand and waved. I closed the curtains. Maybe I am imagining things. I am still looking for a new apartment, but I have not found anything I can afford. I sold the elliptical trainer because I might be living under a bridge soon, and exercise equipment is difficult to carry when you are homeless. Once I leave, I am sure the Craigslist advertisement will appear again. The photos will look perfect. The rent will still be $200. There will be a long line of desperate people outside. One of them will be chosen. Maybe it will be you. If you are lucky, you might become the next primary tenant. When the strangers arrive, let them use your bathroom. Let them sit on your couch. Ignore them when they watch you exercise or draw pictures of you while you eat. If they stand around your bed at night, keep your eyes closed. Do not touch their faces. Do not ask what they are doing. Play dumb, and remember they are not there for the apartment. They are there because of you. Story 5. The last thing Mia said before leaving me alone in the old underground station was, "Keep your keys on you." I laughed because I thought she was joking. That was what I did whenever anyone at work said something strange. I smiled, laughed, and waited for them to admit they were trying to scare the new employee. They never did. I had only worked there for 13 days. It was a horror-themed escape room built inside an abandoned underground station, which sounded like a fake job whenever I tried to explain it to anyone. My friends thought it was the coolest place in the world. I thought it was perfect. I had always loved horror films, ghost stories, and abandoned buildings. I also desperately needed money. So being paid to spend my evenings inside a dark underground station seemed like a dream. The building smelled permanently of damp concrete, old dust, rust, and something colder that I could never identify. No matter how much air freshener the company used, the smell of the original station always came through. The owners had done a surprisingly good job converting the place. The old ticket hall had become the reception area. The original ticket windows were still there, but the glass had been painted black, and fake hands had been placed behind some of them to frighten customers. The old staff rooms had become offices, break rooms, and storage cupboards. The platforms and tunnels had been divided into several escape rooms. There was the blackout, where players moved through an apartment during a power failure while something supposedly hunted them in the dark. There was Last Train, which took place inside an old underground carriage. Players had to solve a series of clues before the train reached a station that did not exist. Then there was the shelter, an old wartime bunker beneath the lowest platform. It was considered the best room in the building. I had never been allowed to reset it alone. No matter how many fake cobwebs the company hung from the ceiling, or how many plastic bones they screwed into the walls, you could always tell what the place had once been. Sometimes, when the building was quiet, I could almost imagine trains moving through the sealed tunnels. I would feel a faint vibration beneath my shoes. Then it would stop. On my first shift, the manager gave me a tour. His name was Daniel. He was a thin man in his 40s who always looked tired. His eyes were dark, and he spoke in a calm voice that somehow made everything sound serious. After showing me the rooms, he brought me back to reception. "How long do you think you'll last?" he asked. I thought it was a normal question about how long I planned to stay at the job. "Until I get fired? Probably." I hesitated after saying it, worried I had made a bad joke. Daniel smiled. but he did not smile as though it were funny. Most people say that. Then he walked away. Everyone who worked there was a little unusual, but that seemed normal for a horror attraction. Josh, one of the game operators, collected broken dolls and kept them lined up on a shelf in the staff room. Mia always wore black and had a habit of standing silently behind people until they noticed her. Another employee named Lewis refused to use the staff toilets because he said someone breathed beneath the stalls. I assumed they were all playing characters, even when there were no customers around. Maybe working in a horror attraction for too long changed people. On my third shift, Josh told me not to enter the shelter after 11 at night. I was sorting clue cards behind the front desk when he said it. Why? I asked. He shrugged, as though I had asked where we kept the spare pens. It gets cold. I looked at him. It's an underground station. Everything gets cold. No, he replied. Not like that. I waited for him to smile. He continued cleaning the desk. A few days later, Mia was teaching me how to reset last train. She showed me where to return the padlocks, how to replace the hidden envelope under one of the seats, and where to put the fake blood capsule if a player had triggered the wrong clue. The room had been built around a real underground carriage that had been left behind when the station closed. The windows were dark, and the metal doors no longer moved properly. We had almost finished when one of the old ticket windows outside suddenly slammed shut. The sound echoed through the empty station. I jumped and nearly dropped a box of props. Mia did not even turn around. If the windows close by themselves, ignore them, she said. I stared at her. That happens? Only when the place is busy. Busy with customers? Mia looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up the box and walked away. I laughed because I thought I was supposed to. She did not. My first closing shift alone was on a Wednesday. Wednesdays were usually quiet. We might get a couple of groups after work, and perhaps a birthday booking if we were unlucky. Weekends were different. On Fridays and Saturdays, the station filled with drunk office workers, teenagers pretending not to be frightened, and couples arguing over puzzles. That Wednesday, only 2 groups had booked. One group was already halfway through last train. The second had just entered the blackout. The reception area was empty except for Mia and me. Mia was wearing her coat and leaning against the desk while she explained the closing routine for the 3rd time. Reset both rooms after the groups leave, she said, counting each step on her fingers. Check the toilets. Make sure nobody is hiding in the corridors. Turn off the lights. Lock the front door from the inside before you count the money. I remember. Lock the front door before you count the money, she repeated. People sometimes try to come in after closing. I understand. She looked toward the corridor. And the shelter? Locked before 11. Good, she watched me for slightly too long. I smiled. Because it gets cold? Mia's expression did not change. Because it gets cold. Then she leaned over the desk and tapped the ring of keys clipped to my belt. There were 6 keys on it. The front door, the office, the storage cupboard, the main corridor, the shelter, and a small black key nobody had explained to me. Ignore strange noises, Mia said. Do not go looking for anything after closing. I know, and keep your keys on you. I laughed quietly. You all really commit to this. Mia picked up her bag. Yeah, she said as she walked toward the exit. That's what everyone says. The bell above the front door rang when she stepped outside. Rain was falling heavily in the street. I watched her pull up her hood and walk away. After several steps, she stopped. She turned and looked through the glass. Her lips moved. I could not hear her, but I knew what she said. Keep your keys on you. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The final group was still inside the blackout, so I sat behind the front desk and opened my laptop. I had university work to finish, and quiet shifts were usually perfect for studying. 6 CTV screens were mounted on the wall opposite me. Each one showed a different room. The players in the blackout were arguing over clues. One of them triggered a jump scare and screamed, causing the others to laugh. The other rooms were empty. Last train had already been reset by Mia. The shelter was dark and still. I typed several sentences, then looked up again. Something moved on the screen. Not inside the blackout. Inside the shelter. My hands stopped above the keyboard. The camera in the shelter always looked worse than the others. The image was gray, grainy, and slightly distorted. The room had been designed to look like a wartime bunker. Rows of wooden benches stood along the walls. Old sandbags were piled near the entrance. Cracked tiles covered the floor, and a fake collapsed tunnel blocked the far end. There were gas masks, old posters, and broken suitcases placed around the room. According to Mia, some of the props had already been inside the station when the company bought it. The room was supposed to be empty. I leaned closer to the monitor. For a moment, I thought I saw a person moving between the benches. It was only a dark shape. It crossed from one side of the screen to the other and disappeared. I checked the booking system. Nobody had booked the shelter that evening. I looked at the clock above reception. 11:05. My stomach tightened. Damn it. Mia's warning returned immediately. The shelter must be locked before 11. I stood quickly. 5 minutes could not matter that much. Maybe the camera was faulty. Maybe Mia or Josh had placed something inside to frighten me. That seemed possible. They knew it was my first closing shift alone. The entire staff probably thought it would be funny to scare me. The corridor leading toward the shelter felt longer than it had earlier. The lights were weak and yellow. My footsteps echoed from the tiled walls. As I moved deeper into the station, the temperature dropped. It was not the usual cold of an underground building. This cold felt sharp. It moved through my clothes and settled inside my bones. By the time I reached the shelter, goosebumps covered my arms. The door looked like every other staff door in the building. It was heavy, dark green, and scratched around the handle. I stopped in front of it. My hand hovered above the lock. Then I heard voices. They came from inside the room, not one voice. Many, dozens of people whispered behind the door. The voices overlapped, making it impossible to understand any single sentence. It sounded like a crowd trying to speak without being discovered. I stepped back. The whispers continued. Some sounded like men. Others sounded like women. I thought I heard a child crying. My hand shook as I reached for the keys on my belt. For one terrible second, my fingers found nothing. Panic rose through my chest. Then I touched the cold metal ring. The keys were still attached. I pulled them free and searched for the one marked with a small red sticker. "Just lock it," I whispered. "Lock it and leave." The key entered easily. The moment it touched the lock, every voice inside stopped. The silence was immediate. I could hear my own breathing. I turned the key. The lock clicked. Something touched the other side of the door. It sounded like a hand pressing gently against the wood. I stepped away. "Okay," I whispered. A nervous laugh escaped me. "That's fine. That's probably fine. It was only 5 minutes after 11. Nothing serious had happened. My coworkers were playing a prank. That was what I kept telling myself as I returned to reception. I walked quickly, but I did not run. The timer for the blackout showed 5 minutes remaining when I sat back down. I opened my laptop and tried to finish the paragraph I had been writing. I read the same sentence several times. The words stopped making sense. My attention kept returning to the CCTV screen showing the shelter. The room appeared empty. The benches had not moved. The door at the far end remained blocked by fake rubble. I told myself that proved I had imagined everything. Then, the timer for the blackout reached 0. A few seconds later, the door at the end of the corridor opened. 4 customers came out, laughing too loudly. They were all in their early 20s. One girl held tightly to her friend's sleeve and insisted she had not screamed during the final puzzle. The tallest man in the group was being accused of hiding behind everyone else. "You pushed me forward," one girl told him. "I was protecting you. You used me as a shield." They reached the reception desk and opened the lockers where they had left their phones and bags. I forced a smile. "Did you enjoy it?" "It was brilliant," the tall man said. "Really scary." "The woman was horrible," one of the girls added. She laughed while putting on her coat. "Whose idea was that?" I looked up. "What woman?" "The crying woman." My smile disappeared. She pointed toward the corridor, the one in the corner near the end. "When the lights went out." Another girl nodded. She was sitting on the floor. I thought she was a mannequin, but then she moved. There was no actor inside the blackout. No crying woman was part of the room. The final scare used flashing lights, speakers, and a mannequin behind a curtain. No employee was supposed to enter while customers were playing. I glanced down the corridor. The door to the blackout stood open. "Right," I said slowly. "Yes, she's new." The group looked impressed. "Tell her she was terrifying," the girl said. "I will." They gathered their things and headed for the exit. The bell above the front door rang. Their voices slowly disappeared into the rainy street. The station became silent again. I checked the camera inside the blackout. The corner the customers had described was empty. For some reason, that made me feel worse. I still had to reset the room. I stood behind the desk for several minutes, staring at the monitor. The customers had probably mistaken a pile of clothing for a woman. Maybe one of them was trying to frighten me. Perhaps they had realized I was new and invented the story. I picked up the reset checklist. Then I reached for my keys. They were still clipped to my belt. I checked twice. The blackout was darker than the other rooms. Its walls had been painted black, and most of the lights were hidden behind damaged furniture and fake walls. I followed the checklist. Return the key to the drawer, reset the number lock, replace the batteries in the prop radio, close the hidden door, move the mannequin back behind the curtain. Nothing unusual happened. Still, I checked behind every curtain. I looked beneath the table. I opened the wardrobe even though it was not part of the reset. The floor creaked behind me several times, and each time I turned quickly. Nobody was there. At one point, I saw movement in the cracked mirror beside the fake fireplace. I nearly dropped the lantern. It was only my own reflection. By the time I finished, I had almost convinced myself that the strange events were nothing. The shelter camera had glitched. The whispers were sound from old pipes. The customers had imagined the crying woman. I left the blackout and headed toward reception. I planned to lock the front door, count the money, and leave as quickly as possible. I was halfway down the corridor when the bell above the entrance rang. I stopped walking. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy boots crossed the tiled reception floor. My stomach dropped. Mia's instructions returned to me. Lock the front door from the inside before you count the money. I had forgotten. Sorry, I called while moving quickly toward reception. We're closed. The footsteps stopped. I turned the final corner. The reception area was empty. The front door was closed. Outside, rain reflected the orange streetlights. The pavement was empty. Nobody stood near the desk. No customer had entered. I stared at the door. The bell swung gently above it. I listened. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I rubbed both hands over my face. Brilliant, I whispered. I'm losing my mind. I walked to the door and locked it. Then I reached for the keys clipped to my belt. My fingers touched empty fabric. I froze. I checked again. Nothing. I searched my pockets. My hoodie, my bag, the desk. I looked beneath the chair and behind the lockers. The keys were gone. I tried to remember when I had last touched them. They had been on my belt before I entered the blackout. I had checked twice. I returned to the corridor and searched the floor. Come on, I whispered. Where are you? I walked back through the blackout. I looked beneath the table, behind the curtains, inside the wardrobe, and near every prop I had moved. No keys. The station felt colder. I returned to the main corridor. When I passed the shelter, the temperature dropped suddenly. Cold air poured from beneath the locked door. My breath appeared in front of me. The lights above flickered. Once, twice, then they became steady. I stopped. Something jingled behind me. My keys. The sound was soft but clear. I turned. A little girl stood at the far end of the corridor. She looked 7 or 8 years old. Her dress was old and gray, covered in dust and dirt. In one hand, she held a worn teddy bear by its leg. In the other hand, she held my keys. She was not simply pale. Her skin had no color at all. She looked like an old photograph that had somehow stepped out of its frame. Her dark hair hung around her face. She lifted the keys. Jingle, Mum said you can open the door, she told me. My throat became dry. Behind her, shapes moved in the darkness. At first, they looked like shadows. Then, they came closer. There were dozens of people standing in the corridor. Men wore long coats and hats from another time. Women had scarves tied around their hair. Children held their parents' hands. Their clothing was covered in pale dust. Their faces were gray. Some had blood around their mouths. Others had dark marks across their skin. Every one of them watched me. The little girl stepped closer. Mum said, "You have the keys." Whispers began around her. "Open it. Please. Let us out. We can't breathe. The air's gone. Open the door." More figures appeared behind them. The corridor should not have been large enough to hold so many people, but the crowd continued growing. They pressed shoulder to shoulder. Some stood inside the walls. Others seemed to rise from the floor. I could hear coughing. Crying. Someone repeatedly called the name Elizabeth. The little girl held the keys toward me. Mum's waiting. The door to the shelter shook behind me. Once, then again. Something struck the other side. The people in the corridor began walking toward me. Slowly. Their shoes scraped against the tiles. The girl stayed in front. My keys jingled in her hand. I wanted to ask who they were. Part of me already knew. The station had closed many years earlier after an accident. I had read a short article about it during my first week, but the company's website described the history as unclear. A section of tunnel had collapsed during the war. People had been taken into an underground shelter during an air raid. The entrance had been blocked. Rescue workers did not reach them for days. The official number of deaths was never confirmed. The escape room company had turned that shelter into an attraction. The people kept moving closer. The girl stopped only a few meters away. "Please," she said. The word sounded different from the others. She was not threatening me. She was begging. Behind me, the locked door shook harder. The whispers became louder. "Open it. Let us out. The air is gone." I imagined myself taking the keys from the girl. I imagined opening the shelter. I wondered whether the people would leave peacefully. Then, something behind the crowd raised its head. It was taller than all of them. Its body was thin and bent. It wore no human clothing.